Our plan was always world domination. It was always total world domination.
You know, he's like the sort of Brian Clough of pop, isn't he, Pete Waterman? He took Nottingham Forest to Europe and came back with a cup, and he's sort of objectionable but brilliant.
The first stock Aitken Waterman #1 was Dead or Alive.
We went in and did about 5 tracks with them. Spin Me was amongst them. We delivered them back to our record company, A&R person at the time. We were told it was rubbish and it wasn't going to be a hit. But then Pete Waterman, I think, really wanted to prove himself, and he kind of knew there was a #1 there. And he promoted that record relentlessly on the Scampi and Chips circuit, where he was a DJ at the time. And the rest, to a certain degree, is history. It was an extremely big hit record.
That record went from 41 to 40 more weeks than I've had hot dinners, down to 41, to 39, back to 41, up to 36, back to 41, up to 30, back to 41. I mean, this record took 17 weeks to get to #1. And the reason it took so long is because literally it did break the mould of pop records. People took a while to understand what it was all about.
PWR wrote the song for me, Toy Boy. I'd been going out with David Essex, who was like also a pop star, but about 50 years, no, he wasn't 50 years older than me, quite a lot older than me, like 38 to my 16 or something ridiculous. And finally that went pear-shaped. And I met this gorgeous boy who was dancing for me, who was my age. And but I call him my toy boy because I finally had a young boyfriend. And we went over and they'd written a chorus, they hadn't written a song. They'd written a chorus and they sang it to me, and I was like, oh yeah, cool. Pete told me it was a hit, and literally, how do you do, into the studio, 20 minutes later, you know, they were like, see you later, and I was thrilled. You know, usually you'd be there all night, and it was like, you know, 20 minutes from hello to goodbye, and I thought, great.
My background is DJing to kids of 15, 16. I saw there was a correlation between a gay market and a 15-year-old market. I thought it was exactly the same market. There was no difference. It was the same vulnerable issues. It was the same sexual issues, but they were just different sexes. You know, I'd love to say I sat down and thought, oh, now what I need to do is get a television soap opera star. It doesn't work like that, because literally we had found a young lad who was the T-boy, Rick Astley, and turned him into the world's biggest artist.
They were incredible records, and they made some very unlikely stars. I mean, Rick Astley was no oil painting, but, you know, those soundtracks just needed a front person. If the front person was Kylie Minogue, you're making hay.
She's been very lucky, very, very lucky, oh, so very lucky in us. Yes, she...
I mean, there was a period, I think, probably for 3 years, where we never had a record out of the top 30. I mean, every week you're sitting in your office, you're literally making £1 million a day. That is impressive.
The Hit Factory was working overtime to produce pop stars perfect for the smash hits market. The magazine was now being read by almost every teenager in the land, but there was still one blonde with ambition they had yet to feature.
I got in touch with number 10 and said, 3 million teenagers read this magazine. At the very least, these 3 million people will influence how their parents are going to vote. And we did it as a bit of a laugh, really. I think we were quite keen on them saying no, because we could then print the letter saying, dear Smash Hits, I've decided not to let you in to see the Prime Minister. And to our absolute shock and horror, they rung back within about 24 hours and said, yeah, fine.
I bought a cheap suit from Mr. Byright and went along to meet the Iron Lady. And I asked her when Cliff Richard would be knighted. She said, always be serious. And now he is knighted, of course.
She trotted out this unbelievably dated old hokey about her favourite record, I can't remember what it was now, something like, how much is that doggy in the window? Obviously, Tom just trotted this out. He made the very astute connection between the idea of how much is that doggy in the window and the obsession with the great economic boom. The idea that her favourite record would be one about how much something costs rather than what the music sounded like was quite an astute point.
After she'd banged on for 3/4 of an hour, we wanted to take a photograph, and she insisted that I be photographed beside her. Come on, sit beside me. You'll always want to remember this day. And as it turned out, she was right.
In 2003, the race is on to make your magazine stand out.
Shortly before I started at Smash Hits, somebody had the bright idea to put GIFs on the front of pop magazines, so all the pop magazines had to follow. Nowadays, you know, it's not enough just to have your gorgeous hunky star on the front cover, you also want a big fat gift as well to take home. So we had to kind of balance those two things. So if you had a bit of a ropey star one week, well, you might kind of get a nice big fat pencil case and stick that on the front of their head.
But this wasn't always the case. Back in the late 80s, if you wanted to be the top-selling magazine, all you had to do was feature pop's golden couple.
I think it's quite a good look, actually. I think if you're going for a sort of more broody, mature look, that's the cover I'd probably go for. But, hey, 800,000 copies. A lot of record companies would like to sell 800,000 of anything at the moment.
Why were they the biggest act? Very simple. Because they were the last real act people believed in as people. Now that is a phenomenal statement when you think that they were from a soap opera.
Neighbours was quite a phenomenon, I can never really say that. I mean, 22 million viewers a day, twice a day, is a pretty powerful place to start a campaign from. I mean, there was also the tantalising Kylie, Jason, are they going out together, are they not going out together? And then you add to that a well-crafted, great pop song that sort of dangled that carrot in front of the readers of Smash Hits. They wanted to know more. Especially for you was, you know, a subtle, million coppers later way of sort of saying, you know, that we were sort of together. If you couldn't work that out, hello.
People never saw Kylie and Jason as Kylie and Jason. They were always Scott and Charlene. The television show had done something that we couldn't have done. It made them touchable. People believe that, you know, Kylie's their mate. That's why Kylie's still around. I mean, first tour we did with Kylie, they still called her Charlene, they didn't call her Kylie. And Kylie was bright enough to realise not to shatter that illusion. Now, Jason had a problem with being Scott, because he wasn't Scott, he was Jason. No, he wasn't, he was Scott. And he never became Jason. Where Kylie was Charlene, but she became Kylie.
Everyone was sort of pitching me as the clean living, nice haircut, sort of boy next door, sort of like as the new Cliff Richard. Well, I was sort of not really, I mean, no offence to Cliff, I think what he's done is great, but it just wasn't where my head was at. I just needed to go away and surf for a couple of years and crash the car and, you know, fuck up a little bit, really, which I did, successfully as well.
Kylie and Jason were hugely popular, but I don't think they had any appeal to boys at all. And Smash Hits was always read more by girls than by boys. I think you get to the height of Kylie and Jason and that's completely just gone. Boys can just go somewhere else. And boys did go somewhere else.
Smash Hits, for me, the magazine just used to be around the house. I think my sister used to get it, so I'd always look into it and probably slag off the bands that she was into at the time. It was around the time of Bros, so it was a magazine that I knew was always around, but for me I was more at that age into football, so I used to buy Shoot.
Pop's female influence was starting to grow, and the industry was gearing up to exploit it. The boy band era was almost upon us.
We are young, but we're still artists. I think that's it. And we started when we were 11.
The Brossettes seemed content to chase their idols up and down the street, but the fans of Curiosity Killed the Cat and Brother Beyond often had something more personal in mind, whether the bands wanted it or not.
We never really thought of ourselves as a boy band. Everyone played their own instruments, we wrote our own songs, except we ended up having our first hit with the stock Aitken and Waterman record, so it just gravitated that way. And then, you know, when you get sucked onto the cover of Smash Hits and you get promoted as a front man and, you know, oh, Nathan, he looks all right, then you end up becoming that boy band and having that teen following. I think there was quite a lot of girls writing in saying, you know, I'd love to be Mrs. Moore or whatever, and a girl in France spoke to a local paper and said that she'd married me. and the paper went with it. And obviously she was very believable because then France Television went down and interviewed her in her front room and broadcast it on the news. In the end, we sent a record company guy down to tell this girl, she's got to stop. It was just getting out of hand, you know. Every question I ever got was like, have you been married then? What's going on? Can tell us about it. It's when they, you know, camp outside your house. That's just gets a nightmare. I remember one day, I was like, I really want to go out, but I really don't want them to follow me down. I just want to buy some newspapers and a pint of milk. So there's me climbing out the back window, climbing over neighbours' walls and stuff like that. Apart from that, it can be quite good fun.
God, I mean, fan worship is something that's still beyond me. I was always really, and still am, sort of quite an insecure person, quite shy or whatever. And like, when they sort of say, oh, you're a sex symbol, or when they say, I got you on my bedroom wall and all this sort of thing, it's like, well, why? You know, it's you must be able to find someone else that's like more fitting for that sort of thing. I never ever slept with one fan, ever. I mean, you know, like, normally the fans would be all like too young or too but ugly, you know, smack with an ugly stick when they were younger or something. No, with no disrespect, but like, I certainly never got tempted. I mean, one time I had this girl like grab my balls and sort of say like, I'm not leaving here until I have you in my mouth. And she wasn't ugly and whatnot, but you know, she was so like intimidating, and I actually had to sort of try and avoid her. But that wasn't our scene. No, when I say our scene, I'm speaking for myself, because I don't know about Miggy, but I know a couple of the others like got right off on it, you know, regardless of looks and.
I mean, I can't say I never did, but I didn't a lot either. And as Ben says, there were others in the band that did it regularly.
Here they are live with their second single, which is out today. Extremely wonderful. They're bound to make the entire nation sweat. It's Curiosity Killed the Cat.
For the most fanciful band in Britain, it wasn't overeager fans who would bring them down to earth.
We partied too hard. We weren't kind of professional in that kind of sense about, you know, we've got interviews to do. And
I disagree, though. I don't think we partied too hard. We just partied. And we weren't professional, though. For instance, like, we were in Japan one time, and they have this thing called sake in Japan. And they also have this thing called Suntory whiskey, which they go crazy on, and they'd be, like, putting their bottles of sake and going like this, and then having competitions and all that, and we used to get wrecked. In the morning, one time, our tour manager came around to tell us we wanted interviews live on the radio at 7 in the morning. So we all like picked up the phone at 7 in the morning after having like some mad night, and all of us, 4 of us, fell asleep on air, and it completely blew our Australian career.
Curiosity may have helped kill their own career, but for another star, Smash Hits was the prime suspect. And after it all began so promisingly.
Gosh, when I put the one and only out, I was only 19. It was very overwhelming, because we used to have a lot of people camp outside the house. You know, I used to still live with my parents, and this one girl knocked on the door. Mum came to the door and she said, I'm really desperate for the toilet, can I? She said, all right. Mum said, yeah, go on then, the toilet's just there. And she stole some toilet roll, went outside and was selling it off at £1 a go. £1 a sheet. Chesney's used, not used, I think. But it was a pretty meteoric rise and fall, I guess. When we first put out the record, everybody was on my side, but it did kind of turn for me. I did get a lot of negative press, including Smash Hits. You know, I'd do all these great shots, and on one of them you're just kind of mucking around or whatever, and I don't know why, I had a saucepan lid or something, and I put it on my head and they just snapped it, you know, and that was the front cover, of course, you know.
I mean, Smash Hits killed Chesney, didn't they? I think they went in through the mole and it was all over.
I always thought the mole thing to be a bit odd, really, because it's not much of a mole. I mean, look, you hardly see it. I mean, I do remember one Smash Hits actually saying that he saw the film and it looked like my mole was the size of a plate. I guess that is the nature of the business, and, you know, it was a hard time, but, you know, I got through it.
Here was a guy who'd come along with a cheesy kind of pop rock kind of sound, and everyone just took the mickey out of him. At that point, the company's just said, right, we've had it with pop music. Pop music in Britain was over in 1990, and Smash Hits was very nearly over in 1990, 1991 as well, because there was hardly any pop music around. And those were tough years. The stuff that was in the charts was either faceless dance music, like Adamski or Beats International, which was performed by people who either hated smash hits and didn't want anything to do with it, or were really ugly, or both.
The tide kind of went out on the pop scene, and suddenly you had a scene there that was full genuinely of one-hit wonders, and that gave us lots and lots of problems, because at the end of the day you're only ever as good as the stars who are on your cover, and when people don't want to be pop stars you can't really make them however hard you try. Somebody like Mark Moore was brilliant because he understood that actually the way to be on the cover of Smash Hits was kind of not to make too much of a fuss and to hold a baguette so that you could superimpose the Reynolds girls jumping out of it.
I loved it and I had a great time, but even at that time I remember looking at it all and just saying to myself, this is going to be a big blanding out. And suddenly you didn't have these fantastic pop stars that I had growing up. It just became a bit more faceless, and that really upset me about the whole acid house thing.
It's 3:45 in the morning. The dance floor is crowded with frenetic people. You can barely hear yourself think. And we've counted 30 ecstasy dealers at least. And from the look of the people in there, most of them are on E.
It was very difficult with rave culture because it was really for 18 years old only. And you couldn't really tell kids that there were people in fields and they weren't just having, you know, some Tizer and a little bit of mineral water. There were other substances involved. You can talk about people's trainers and you can talk about vest tops, but those kids really wouldn't be living that life anyway. They wouldn't be allowed to go to that thing. They'd be allowed to buy a Shaman record, Ebenezer Good, and not quite understand what it was about. But I think that culture probably passed Smash Hits by, but I don't think that's a bad thing.
I remember getting asked once about drugs in Smash Hits, and of course we all lied about it. We all said, oh no, it was just pretending to be on drugs. Because, you know, drugs might be fantastic for some people, but I don't particularly want to be making teenagers go out and try it.
Issues like drugs and sex, it was hard for Smash Hits to deal with because it was quite hard to have too much fun with subjects like that, particularly if you're aiming at a 14-year-old girl. Sex was pretty much a no-go area. And with drugs, I think, pretty much pretended that they didn't really exist, but you might make the odd reference to them being in particularly high spirits.
Smash Hits is only as good as the pop music of the time. Pop music at that time was crap. There's not a lot you can do in that situation. What you have to do is you have to sit around for pop music to come back. And thankfully, in 1992, it came back big time.
In 2003, the right image can push you into the charts.
I think just looking at their individual faces, I'm not sure about Lee's face there. I just think he's got a bit of a funny expression on his mouth. Just knowing him, I know he won't like that one so much. That's my favourite one, definitely.
OK, because Lee definitely does look a little bit sexier.
Yeah.
But back in 1992, a boy band was trying to break through using old-fashioned hard graft. British pop was about to be saved by 5 boys who had the right moves, if not yet quite the right look.
That was some live music, Michaela. Who is
Yeah, these are going to be big, these boys. They're the foursome, fivesome. Yeah, take that and do what you like.
Preston, give it up for Take That!
The first pop group to ever make me kind of say, yeah, pop can be cool was when Take That came out. And I remember I went to an all-boys school and there was 2 people in the whole school like Take That, and, you know, straight away people were like, oh, they're the 2 gay fellas in the school.
I think we realised how important Take That could be. I think the very first day they turned up at the offices, firstly, they were pretty good looking. Secondly, they kind of dressed up and were a bit glamorous, even though what they were dressing in the early days with studs and leather perhaps wasn't quite what the young ladies who bought Smash Hits were exactly after. But thirdly, they just had character. So we realised then that if they could make it, they could be real saviours for us.
Do What You Like was our first single. I remember listening to the chart from 40 down to 2, and we thought we'd gone in at number 1. We thought we'd gone straight in the chart at number 1. And we were so disappointed when it was like, and this reached number 1 is Wet, Wet, Wet or something. We were like, hey, where are we? What's going on? It's gone wrong. Went in the chart at 82.
We put a picture, a really small picture of them in their kind of jelly stage, you know, in news, and we got loads and loads and loads of phone calls. loads of phone calls, loads of letters about them, and we knew then that, you know, all they had to do was have one good record and they would be massive, really.
I think Smash Hits were one of the first magazines to come on board for us, and I think we were on like page 2 or something. I seem to remember we were quite early on in the magazine, one to watch out for kind of thing. I was working in a bank, Jay was a painter and decorator, Howard was a mechanic, Rob had kind of just come out of school, I think he was a double glazing salesman, oh, that's what he always said, I don't know if that was true. And it was just like, yeah, in our Lycra shorts and codpieces and our big boots, thinking, come on!
Take That were incredibly keen. They spent their time cultivating us just as much as we cultivated them, to the point where some or all of them would just pop into our offices in swinging Carnaby Street to make us cups of tea. Gary Barlow and Robbie Williams walking round with a little post-it note asking if you took 1 sugar or 2. And they just worked really hard. They wanted to be pop stars.
We set ourselves out to play to about 300,000 people. We did this huge tour where we'd do a school in the morning, school in the afternoon, a youth club, an under 18 and over 18 onto a gay club, and we pretty much did this every day, and that's what broke us into the chart. I think our enthusiasm and our energy was what kind of people warmed to initially. It wasn't our songs, I don't think, that much. I think it was just like, oh, they're trying their best. Look at them all bouncing around like idiots on that stage.
Take That's blood, sweat and tears paid off handsomely, as they became the first band since the Beatles to score 4 consecutive #1s.
Take that!
Not only that, but Smash Hits had now launched its own award show. Take That swept the board, and there wasn't a dry seat in the house.
In the audience, there'd be little 12-year-old girls holding up banners with extremely rude comments about Robbie Williams, what they wanted him to show to them or do to them. You know, fuck me, Robbie, or something. You had to go around and take the banners off the kids rather than show those live on the BBC.
Now, not only...
Probably the biggest scandal that ever happened on the show was Carter Unstoppable Sex Machine, who actually decided that it would be a laugh to kind of dive on top of Philip Schofield live in the middle of a link, for which they got banned from the whole of the BBC for a considerable period of time for bad behaviour. The danger about Smash Hits Pub and Party, it was a completely 100% live show. And I think EMF getting their spray can out and spraying the word fuck over the set in really big letters, again on a live show.
We'll give them a broom in a minute, they're going to sweep the whole place up.
Whilst the stars of the show could still cause problems, when the cameras turned on the crowd, it was the crowd which was causing problems for the magazine.
The average age of the reader when I was editing the magazine, we always had in our head, was about 14. I sensed it was starting to get a bit younger. I think also the Smash Hits show, we cemented that notion, because the show was largely populated by screaming, pubescent girls.
Pop music during the Take That era became very much a big thing for, you know, 8, 9-year-olds. And that's often a problem if you don't want to be seen reading the same magazine as your little sister.
Times were changing. It was becoming increasingly embarrassing for the older teens to admit they liked a boy band. They were looking for credibility, and they found it in the shape of old-fashioned British beat combos who mostly just wanted to beat each other.
You either like one or the other.
Sounds like war to me. Well, Britpop was really a rock movement rather than a pop movement, but Britpop sounded better because these were rock bands. You know, Blur, eventually Oasis, Pulp. These bands were rising, and suddenly we're in the charts.
Tonight, there's no denying Blur are top of the pops.
Briefly, in the mid-90s, the mainstream was in the hands of irresponsible, drunk, iconoclastic maniacs, and that was exciting. To such an extent that the government sort of employed those people to help get them into power, no doubt about it.
The whole of Britpop was co-opted by Tony Blair and his project. You know, this was leading up to the big election victory in '97. And so it had become a political thing almost. It was British pride. It was like suddenly Britain was a good place to be again.
Well, apart from having the naffest name in the history of pop music, it was actually the biggest turn. I mean, what are you trying to turn around and say to a group of kids that are grown up in somewhere like the Ardoyne in Belfast or Milton in Glasgow, that you have to fall in love with this word called Brit? They hate it. I can't even say the word without actually almost retching. So no, of course I didn't take Britpop seriously. I don't know what anybody was thinking of. Who ever thought of that term? I bet you this, they were from a record company and they were from London and they were pricks.
Britpop had enticed Robbie Williams away to a life of cocaine-fuelled hedonism. The new slightly less than Fab Four limped on, then imploded.
Thanks for everybody's support in the last 5 years. Unfortunately, the rumours are true, and from today, there's no more.
I remember when Take That split up, yeah, because I remember going to school and it being like D-Day. Like, all the girls were crying and I was like, what the hell? And I only knew 2 of their names. I knew, like, the fat blonde one was Gary and the sort of, and Robbie was Robbie.
The tears would soon dry up. 4 months after Take That split, a new 5-piece pop group arrived to take their place. But this time, they had breasts.